Welcome everyone to the Ask an Architect show. Here with me today, Joe Ijjas. Joe, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to have Joe. He is the second part of the second couple we've had on the show. His wife Lee has been on before. But we're going to take a very different approach with Joe and kind of dive into small firm culture, something we haven't done a whole lot of on the show. So I think it'll provide a unique value proposition for our audience. So real quickly, Joe, can you kind of give us the 10-second overview of who you are and what you're doing right now?
Sure. So I did my undergraduate degree at University of Florida, and then came up to the University of Maryland for my master's degree. Was drawn to the area basically through solar decathlon, which my wife also mentioned at the time when she was on the show.
Yep,
it was both something we were very interested in. Maryland has a great history of participating in the program, and we were lucky enough to be part of 2011, which was a winning entry. So,
very cool.
That's kind of how we got drawn up here. Graduated around 2011. Not exactly the greatest time to be looking for architecture jobs.
Sure, absolutely. Kind of at the bottom of that cycle.
Yeah, and definitely part of the reason we went for straight from undergraduate into graduate degree programs.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was, I think we both enjoyed our education at Florida, but we were looking to maybe try something a little bit different in terms of pedagogy and what the school systems are like. Sure. Maryland fit that bill and also gave us an opportunity to go to school and not have to necessarily fight for minimal amount of jobs.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is by the time we got out, jobs were actually relatively, I'd say, robust in DC. So
yeah.
It was a good opportunity for us, and it seems to have worked out well so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're the first person to mention that, but I think I remember back at that time, that was a real strategy for a lot of people from maybe 08 to 2012 was, well, gosh, there aren't very many jobs, so let me hop back in, knock out that MArch or whatever it is, MBA, whatever you want to do, and then by the time I come out, hopefully the situation is better, and it seems like it paid off.
Yeah, and I think I'm starting to see it a little bit now with some of the younger people we have in our office as well, that they're considering taking a couple years off, working for a little bit, getting some more experience, and then potentially going back for master's degree.
Because the economy and the workload is so good right now.
Yeah, the opportunities are out there, and people are willing to get some experience before they sort of dive back into the I'll say the more professional side of your architectural education. But
yeah, I think that's a very real thing, and yeah, I'm seeing it now. Multiple offers at places, people saying they can't find somebody to hire, so.
Right.
If you're on the cusp of graduation or just graduated, I mean, we're here at the end of May. Now's a great time to be out there working.
Right.
So, good point. So you, since graduation, you've kind of gone to a couple firms, but you're at Soto right now, right?
Correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about Soto? What's it like? What do you do there, and what the culture is like there?
Sure. So we're a very small firm. We're actually celebrating our 3rd birthday today.
Oh, so that's brand new.
Yeah, we're on the cusp of just trying to figure some things out, but at the same time, so we all come. My first job out of college was actually at Grimm & Parker Architects, and the majority of us in the office are former Grimm & Parker alum. So
interesting that it broken away.
Yeah, so my boss was the studio director in residential design studio at Grimm & Parker, and he decided he wanted to start his own firm based in DC, and decided to sort of take advantage of the opportunity I think we were talking about with the workloads and what was going on. We wanted to really focus on urban environments and impact that. We do a lot of affordable housing work too, so there's been a lot of push for that in the district, which is great. So he started his firm, and just having a previous relationship with him allowed me to sort of have a conversation over a little bit of time as he was setting up the firm and developing sort of the office culture, I guess.
Yeah.
If you will.
Let me ask you, is the reason you kind of went over there because you kind of followed along with him knowing that he was somebody you really wanted to work with? Or was there something that firm was attempting to do, either building type, design style, that really attracted you? Why did you go along on that move?
Right. So it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I had previous relationships, so there was a bit of mentorship there.
Sure.
I really enjoyed working with my previous and now same boss, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the work was, I would say, relatively similar, but there was, I think, a different approach that we were looking to take on maybe how to provide that service to clients at the time.
Interesting. Okay. So, as I mentioned, you're one of the few small firm folks we've had on the show. So what's it like? What do you think the advantages are for somebody looking for their first job? What are the advantages of a small firm for your first gig?
First gig, it's definitely tough. I think it's sink or swim.
Sure.
At a small firm. You're really requested to do everything, sort of be hands-on with, early design concepts all the way through detailing. You may not be understanding some of the details you're drawing, but you don't get siloed into certain positions.
Sure.
Some days I'm the IT guy, some days
Yep.
I'm the project manager, some days I'm the project architect. It just,
Yep.
that's the advantage, is thinking you get such a wide exposure, and you really start to learn architecture is a very wide field, and there's a lot of opportunities in different areas. So that to me is the biggest advantage.
Do you like that variety? Do you like the fact that you can touch everything, or is that sometimes a headache and a hassle that you can't focus on the design because you're also, director
Right.
of IT, and there's an HR issue, and there's somebody needs to, refill the paper on the printer?
I think it depends on the day of the week.
Yeah, sure.
Some days it's not so great. Some days it's perfect.
Yeah.
It really just depends on where you are in your workload and how you can manage that. But in the long term, I think that was the fit for me that I really enjoy the most.
Gotcha.
After a certain amount of time, I think you get tired of maybe doing some of the same things repetitively. So being able to transition different areas, I think, is great.
Gotcha. What would you say just in your typical day, because we're talking to folks who are maybe don't have a ton of practical experience yet in an office. What does a successful day look like for you? When you get home at the end of the day and you're happy with how things went, what happened? What did that look like?
Successful day would be I don't have to answer any more emails.
That's funny you mentioned emails. Sometimes I feel like my portfolio now, or at least even when I was in practice, were emails. I wanted to put emails in my portfolio, not designs. Like, look how well I worded that.
There's, listen to any sort of workplace podcast or self-help, whatever you want
Yep.
to call them, and
Sure.
there's constant conversation about how to manage emails on a
Yep.
daily basis, whether it's inbox zero or ignore it until
Yeah.
it's important. But communication, I think, is just an important part of our job in general, and whether it's phone calls, in-person meetings, emails, I think it's all critical to the success of
Yep.
your work.
Sure. We always say on the show that communication solves all problems. So the better you are at that, whether it's email or just person to person or whatever the other tool you might use, it's critical in the success, even in architecture. Maybe more so than your BIM skills or your design skills or whatever else it is.
Absolutely.
So, Joe, you also kind of, you're obviously at the kind of the earlier stages of your career in the grand scheme of things, and you're already licensed. Tell me a little bit about that process for you. Maybe not tips and tricks, but what motivated you to go through it and get it done quickly?
Sure. So, I think early on when you first get into architecture school, nobody sits you down and says, all right, you've got 4 years or 5 years of school and then another 2 years of grad school, depending on your system, and then 3 years of NCARB and interning and 7 tests, or I think it's 6
right.
now.
You don't understand the magnitude
Right.
of all the pieces and
So
parts.
as you develop through this whole process, you start to understand the value of, I think, getting to that finish line. And to me, once I graduated, that was the big thing. It's like I wanted to be able to say, I was an architect. I completed all the schooling, done the internships, passed the exams, and I think that was my big driver to get to that point.
It was a finish line.
It was. And,
Gotcha.
And I know it's a nice thing to say, and in some realities, it doesn't make as much sense in terms of practice. You're not necessarily stamping your drawings.
Sure. A lot of people will say that. Yep.
But I think what it does is it provides you a platform or a springboard to sort of start to pursue whatever avenues within the profession you're really interested in.
Opens up opportunities.
Absolutely.
So when that right thing comes, you're at least qualified and eligible to go after it, to chase it. So you mentioned finish line a little bit. Not to transition off topic, but you have a unique background in the fact that you played football for the University of Florida. So not many people in architecture school also juggle varsity sports.
No.
So is there anything that you took from that experience that helps you today, or maybe even helped you in school? The fact that you had, maybe it was balance, maybe that you had two very polar but equally dedicated, equal requirements of dedication. I mean, being on the football team is just as difficult as, running studio constantly. So how do you juggle those? How did it help you be the architect you are today?
I think that the biggest one is just time management. That there's literally only so many hours in a day.
Yep.
And when I was in school, you had practice, you had other activities, team meetings, whatever, and then you had studio and you had classes. So
Yep.
when you had your extra time where you're actually trying to get all your other work done, you had to come in and you just had to do it. And
Yep.
sometimes that didn't always produce the best results because you couldn't really do sort of the iterative design process that I think school teaches you and
Sure.
that you try and work for. But other times it teaches you that just getting your ideas out and getting them on paper and getting something moving is the best way to get a project going or started, and eventually you'll get to the point where you need.
That's interesting. So when you talked about time management, and then you just hit right there that you're forced to get started and you're forced to make progress and make movement because your time is limited. So
Right.
the time to do all the iterative steps along the way is probably condensed. So
Which is kind of funny because I'm typically a procrastinator, so
yeah, so you don't have that option.
yeah, it definitely sort of threw things in to make it a little more interesting sometimes.
Yeah.
But
All in all, looking back on it, would you say that it was helpful to have those two strong commitments, or would you do it differently?
I absolutely think they are, and I think something that's important for architecture and just people in general is to have sort of varied experiences.
Yep.
I think when you sort of
Absolutely.
silo yourself into one profession or one hobby or whatever it is,
Yep.
you tend to lose perspective on some other ideas, and I think it's
Very good
important to
point.
have the
Yeah.
variety.
Yeah, I think regardless of what you do as a profession, the more perspectives and experiences that you have, the variety of that experience and breadth of it really informs what you do. So the more of it, the better. Cool. So Joe, kind of wrapping up a little bit here, but keeping in mind that we have a lot of folks who, again, just graduated or on the precipice of graduation. If you're looking back to yourself at that point, what advice would you give yourself, or what would you tell our audience? Now that you've been out for several years and you have a license, you're in a thriving practice, what would you tell somebody on the doorstep of the profession?
I think the biggest thing that you see today is not a lack of work ethic, but I think people sort of underestimate sometimes the amount of work that goes into things. And developing that work ethic early on, I think, is important to really being successful, and not just I'm putting in massive amounts of hours to a project, but really understanding where the important hours are and which parts are critical to sort of creating a successful project or successful career, I think.
And sometimes that even takes patience, so it's that hard work over a period of time
Right.
before you finally start to see the results you want to see.
Absolutely.
I think that's good advice. To kind of wrap up on a more personal and a more fun note, can you tell me about a book or podcast or something you could recommend for our audience that you're learning from right now, or that's really entertaining you, or that's just really piqued your interest, whatever it might be?
So, big podcast listener.
Cool.
I really have enjoyed recently the How I Built This podcast.
NPR. Yeah, fantastic.
I got into that obviously through the TED Talks and
Yep.
the TED Radio Hour. And I think there's themes in that you just see over and over. You have very intelligent people, highly successful, but they're successful because they work incredibly hard.
Yep.
And they find that they typically have a couple lucky breaks somewhere along the way.
Absolutely. I always find it fascinating that their backgrounds don't always match up with their business per se. For some reason, they found the niche and pursued it, but they didn't have the formal background in whatever it is. And so that's How I Built This with NPR.
Yeah. And
Cool.
then definitely just
What
looking
else?
forward for Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, always. Tim, our videography, big Game of Thrones fan. Cool. Well, Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great.
It was nice to get your perspective on especially small firm life and that environment. And best of luck to you in the coming years.
Great.
And
Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the Ask an Architect Show.